Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now then, Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent is in studio. Hello, Rory.
Hey, Joe.
And Keith Wood is with us. Keith, you're there.
I am there. How are you, Joe? Are you well?
Very well, very well. So we've had European Heineken Champions Cup action to look back on. Pro 14 coming up this weekend, so it's a bit of a gap week before two more back-to-back weeks in Europe. On Friday, Munster play Edinburgh, Ulster play Scarlets, and then Saturday, Connacht host the Southern Kings and Leinster are away to Glasgow. So we'll look back on the action and a little bit ahead. It is interesting, Rory, I know you've read the Joe Schmidt book and weren't best pleased. I haven't seen many good reviews, I must confess. But an interesting point made by Luke Fitzgerald on the Left Wing podcast, which obviously you're familiar with.
Yeah.
He was in the book, Joe Schmidt was making the point that with Devon Toner's omission from the World Cup, there was the potential for a sighting, and they feared a ban for Toner, and that was their rationale for not keeping him. And Lucas Fitzgerald was saying, well, that sounds weird, to be honest. I don't think that sounded right. The message definitely wasn't relayed to Devon. So Devon Toner didn't get that excuse. These are the things that happen when you release a book and people start picking away at it, and off we go. Keith, you never wrote a book?
No. I never at the time. That was what I always kind of felt. And I also used to say, well, I was too young. Well, I'm probably not too young anymore. I never really got around to it. I kind of liked the idea of it for a while. It was quite funny. I decided at one stage that I would write a book, but I wanted to do it myself. And when I got around to it, I actually didn't have the time for it. I was trying to start up new businesses and things like that, and it got pushed down the line. And I was quite glad to push it down the line then, So what more do I have to say? I say most of it is off the ball anyway.
It's true, we've gotten it for free. It's very notable the thing Schmidt has been criticised for, and he was here with Ger and Alan Quinlan, and he responded to those criticisms where he said, I have revealed myself as a coach, and the middle section of the book is him laying out his philosophy, and he does at points give you a good insight into how he saw the game at Leinster, and people talked to this offloading game at Leinster, and he said that was a misreading of what I was doing. But probably he said himself, he's a very private individual, and that comes across all through the book, Keith. And that is, for anyone who writes a book, if they want to do a really, 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 really good job, a really honest job, they're going to have to cross lines of privacy. They're going to have to break confidence with fellow players and fellow managers and put it all out there. And that is a line that very, very, very few ever manage to cross. I suspect that was in your thinking as well.
Well, no, it is true. And I think when you're captain of a group of players or have been over 7 or 8 years or whatever it was, you get to know people, you get to know what makes them tick. You also get to know what are their pressure points. That's a pretty interesting story. I would never want to write that story, and I think that's part and parcel of it. And so I do think that's probably where Joe came across, and I haven't read any of it, I have to say, and I will read it. And I am interested in some of his coaching things and the things that made him tick himself. But I think it is hard when you're a head coach. I don't know that you can. I think it's a difficult one to get it fully across, to say, well, I can be hypercritical of players and then not be critical of them at all. I think it's a fairly difficult position to be in. But you know what? And much and all as Rory is there, and I have read a couple of bits that he had on it, and he's critical of it. I think for a lot of fans, they'll want to know a little bit of insight into him, and whether it doesn't get there or not, it doesn't give us the insight that maybe we'd like and we're yearning after a World Cup. But I think for an insight into the man, you get a bit more of it, and he is a particularly type of private person, and so I think a lot of fans would like that and would like to get an insight into it. It also shows you the sort of guy he is too. He's incredibly organised and controlled, and he got his story out in exactly the manner in which he did, which may not be what a ghostwriter would do, or maybe not what a publisher would necessarily want either. So, look, that's fine. That's what he decided to go and do. We're not getting the insight. We're still looking for an insight into the World Cup, because it has been very quiet since the World Cup.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're hungry for that information.
Well, there's certainly no obligation on anyone to pay over their hard-earned cash for the book. It's a choice they'll make. You wrote your review of it. You didn't think it gave enough.
Well, personally, yeah. I mean, that's a completely fair comment from Keith. And it's the book Joe Schmidt wanted to put out there ultimately, and that's the product that the book will live and die in what he was giving to it. And I've got people coming back and saying your review is rubbish. I've got people coming back and saying you're completely wrong. I love the book, and that's everyone's going to have their own take on it. But I think a lot of people could listen to what Keith said there about giving something a bit of time, and also maybe giving it a couple of years, and maybe it's very, very soon after the event to have gotten the book out, and I think there's definitely a sense of that with the World Cup stuff, that it's very, very raw, and he almost doesn't want to let the rawness in, so it's very much run of play. And also when did he get the time to put this all together? Whether you use a ghostwriter or not, there's nothing sacred about a writer, but definitely have a defined structure around it. But I mean, we're not in a book show. There was nuggets in there. I thought it could have given an awful lot more. I'd love to have gotten a lot more out of it. But it was it was his book, the one he wanted to put out of it. And to be honest, by putting himself up for a round of interviews afterwards, we've gotten a lot more of the personal stuff. Particularly, I thought Brendan Fanning's one on Sunday. He got an awful lot of just the kind of stuff that Joe hadn't planned to put in there, but ended up in the Sunday Independent rather than his book about his family and where they came from. Stuff that we didn't know that was really fascinating.
It's hard to probe and prod yourself.
That's it, and especially when you're doing it in snippets away from running away from camp for 10 minutes and putting together a diary, and you're probably thinking about 20 different things. So it's a tough process to do when you're in the mix of it. I think. There's obviously a demand, publishing and all that sort of stuff, that they want it for Christmas and all that sort of stuff. But it could have done some time.
Maybe it leaves it up for a sequel.
I want the unauthorised biography by Rory O'Connor, which he mentioned to Brendan Fanning, interestingly, and it does nod to the controlling aspect Keith mentioned. He mentioned to Brendan Fanning that one of the reasons he started the book was that he got wind of a journalist going around to other players beginning the bones of the Joe Schmidt years type book, and he thought, well, I'm going to beat you to the punch and I'm going to put forward my version first. And that's probably not the best motivation to start a story like this.
No, I mean it's reactive rather than proactive. I'm pretty sure he shut down that book pretty well as well. I think the word got out that he didn't want people talking. So
if someone was writing a book about me, I would shut it down too, I'd say.
Maybe so. Do you have the power?
No, I don't.
Do you have that influence?
I don't think the book would sell too well either.
No, maybe not. But you're right. That's the motivation is part of it as well. He's obviously just trying to get his version of his own story out there, and that's what he did.
Yeah, just on that, it's kind of, I always think these things are interesting, but if you stand up and say, let's get Rory just to talk entirely about the rugby on his own, that he was involved in, not Rory or me or whoever it is, and just say, let's go on a radio show and just talk and say, I did this, I did that, really particularly uncomfortable. It's where ghostwriters come in, actually, for sports people or people who are not authors first and foremost. To be an author sounds very simple. Sure, I can tell my story, but actually, when you're talking about yourself, everybody feels a bit uncomfortable. So maybe there will be a sequel because of it.
Yeah. Well, you can watch. He was in with Ger and Alan Quinlan, the full interview, 58 minutes worth, and it's good discussion. So that's available in all the usual channels. To look back on the weekend, I might start with Ulster, because we've talked about the weekend a few times in the show and actually haven't got to Ulster, because generally it was the furthest game away, and had a few complaints from our friends up in Belfast as well, to say as much. So they beat Claremont 18 points to 13. The news today, by the way, Will Addison has been hit with a 4-week ban, so he's going to miss the Harlequins games back to back. John Cooney's almost emerged as the main talking point here. His form, Rory, is very hard to ignore right now.
And it's nothing new. I mean, I do think that not to keep harping on about Joe Schmidt, but Joe Schmidt had John Cooney as a very young player at Leinster, and maybe a couple of kind of perceived thoughts about John Cooney but by the time he made it to Ulster, became the leading man up there. And maybe having a new coach and you're looking at him will maybe get him onto that next step as a proper rival to Conor Murray, because he's went up there in 2017. He's been a match winner. He's earned them more points, I'd say, than any other individual in the team. He's kind of their key. I know he's not the captain, but he is a key leader in their setup. He's clearly Murray-esque in the way he runs things from 9, kind of that French style. Billy Burns just kind of flits in and out in a kind of a much more flits in and out in a kind of, he chooses his moments, whereas Cooney's the one running the show. I'm not sure if he's as defensively strong as Conor Murray is, but Cooney has emerged as, like, he's 29, so, if you're talking about cycles and stuff, he may be not the perfect fit, whereas Luke McGrath is probably the right age. But as the form 9 at the moment, it's him and McGrath, because Murray, I think, has still not got to the level that we know he can. I mean, he's the class in the field, but whether he's at the level that he used to be, I'm still not sure. But Cooney for Ulster has been just a revelation. If you think of the desperate straits, I know it's a well-worn story at this stage, when Pienaar went and they all felt like it was all over, and he's gone up there and he's just embraced it. I was up there yesterday, I asked McFarland about him, and he was just saying that he had him at Connacht, and he said he always had the tools, but sometimes it takes a guy getting backed and becoming a main player, and shining and getting Ravenhill singing his name, and suddenly he grows another couple of feet, and he's a very, very confident player, Cooney. He's always had faith in his own ability. He almost was just waiting for someone else to see it. Yeah. I remember talking to him at Connacht, and he was talking about playing for Ireland, and he couldn't get in the Connacht team. So he's always had this faith that he could get there, and it's great that he has, and Andy Farrell's got a plethora of options in the number 9 shirt, which is no bad thing either.
No, it's true, and we're not talking about good performances in the Pro 14. Like, he ups his game and seems to hit really significant heights in European games the week before at the Rec. And then McFarland was funny talking, Keith, about the Cooney try, where he was isolated and took off on his own, and McFarland was saying no, 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 and then that turned into yes, 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 and go, go, go. And on replay, you noticed that he spotted probably 3 forwards that side of the ruck and went that way. I don't know how much he sized it up, but it worked out in the end for sure. How much is he nipping on the heels of Murray and McGrath, and where is he in the pecking order at this stage?
I think it's funny. I looked at that and I just thought it was pure football. I mean, that isn't something that really you can teach or practice, to say that in these certain circumstances you can see exactly where the gap is. You have the skill to chip it into that area, to do all the things that you need to do. Anyway, I think he's playing really, really well. I think he really is snapping on them. I disagree over the age at 29 in cycles. I don't think that has to be a factor. And it's funny because I am a fan of youth, and you want the youth to come through. And you also mentioned, Rory, that he was like a French 9. And for our listeners, a French 9 runs an awful lot of the game. You'll see them all from El Assad to Para to Machineau, to all those guys that you see. They run an awful lot of what happens. They goal kick as well. I think Ulster were ready for him because they had a player in Roon Pienaar beforehand. And I think we were all worried, all a bit disappointed when Pienaar left, because he was such a huge influence on there. But they've actually given the reins to a guy that, that's not a traditional Irish 9, not even vaguely, to take on that role and that leadership role. And he's got a bit of a verbal edge to him too. The post-match interview, there was just a tiny little hint of a bitter edge to it. I loved it. I think it's great. You want your 9 to be vocal and a bit angry and have a chip in his shoulder for whatever it is. I think he puts himself well up there. I would agree. I don't think Murray has gone back to his best. I will say that at the match on Saturday, Murray started running again with the ball. He hasn't done that with Ireland at all in the World Cup. So he had 2 or 3 times where he had a bit of a snipe. So his confidence is growing and coming back, and we want to see him back at his best, because at his best he is absolutely brilliant. I think McGrath has been a little bit up and down, both in the World Cup and since. So I think Cooney is well up there. And, you've a new coach coming in. So is he going to throw out everybody? Or is he going to say, we're going to play a bit differently? And lads, you're going to have to play this way. And if you play this way, all bets are off. And I actually am hoping that will be the case, where just because you've played well in the past to a particular game plan, that means you're obviously a shoo-in. I don't think that would be the case.
I'll come back to Ulster generally in just a second for a final word on them, but if we keep the Murray-Cooney comparison going, accepting what you're saying about him running with the ball, Keith, the point has been made in a few quarters about Murray that, and it may be highlighted particularly when Albie Matheson comes on, Murray, by design or otherwise, has got into a bit of habit of maybe loitering over the ball, and there was a bit of extra tempo when Maddison came on. Is that a fair criticism? Why might he be doing that? I would presume for someone of his ability, that should be a 5-minute conversation to sort out.
I think, well, I don't ever think those are 5-minute conversations if it gets into your game too much. I think it's slightly unfair for Saturday, and especially when you're playing against French teams, they do fatigue with 20 minutes to go. If you look at the level of aggression that they were putting into the rucks in the last 20 minutes, it wasn't the same.
Yeah.
You know, having said, and Matheson, in fairness to him, he's like a ferret. He's lower to the ground. He's in there. He gets the ball out. He flings it. Right. So there's kind of a joy to the manner in which he plays as well. I don't think he is as effective starting, strangely, because he's having to go and dig first. Now, he's a beautiful passer of the ball, but Conor has a little bit of a view more on how the game is going around him. So they play in a very, very different style. It isn't comparing like with like. Having said that, Conor is a tall guy. It takes a bit of time to get into those rucks, and he's having to dig for that ball. He isn't as snappy in that situation. So it's, and I do think a bit of it, an element of it's coming back to form. But I'd like him bossing that a little bit more. I'd like more pressure put on the forwards to clear the ruck. The ball should be easier, should be on a plate for him, and it isn't. So, I mean, that's something that Munster have to work on.
I think there is strategy to it as well, and I think, you know, Keith alluded to already, Matheson comes in the same way Jamison Gibson Park comes in for Leinster and just changes the way Leinster are playing and Munster play with the tempo. So you grind down those French forwards for 60 minutes in the hope that, you know, when your quicker New Zealander style scrum half comes on, you can then start moving them. And I think Murray, well, I mean, I don't think they'd ever plan for him to take too long over things, and I do think he sometimes tries to, he's too focused on penalties and, you know, kind of throwing his hands up in the air or tripping over guys who are in offside positions, you know, kind of to try and get the attention to it. I do think there is part of it that he's the first guy in, and then the other guy's the closer. But I think Munster will really miss Matheson. I know you don't want to go back to Ulster, but Matheson's a massive loss. I mean, he was only there as a short-term signing, but he's been a really important player for them and a really class act that they can bring in either when Murray's away for Pro 14 games when he's with Ireland, or for those last 20 minutes. Suddenly they've got someone who can come in and change games with 20 minutes to go. He's gone now. That was his last game for Munster because under IR3 rules he was only signed for a short-term cover. So it's up to Neil Cronin, who's pretty inexperienced despite his age, Nick McCarthy, who has played in big Heineken Cup games for Leinster but has found himself behind Matheson since signing for Munster, or Craig Casey, who's a bit of the kind of great white hope of Munster rugby, the last year's under-20 scrum half, who's very, very highly rated. I think they need to fast-track him very, very quickly and get a lot of experience into him in the next couple of months. But Matheson not losing a player of his calibre off the bench in a 23-man game is a bit of a blow for Munster at this stage of the season.
Harlequins back-to-back for Ulster. Addison going is obviously a massive blow. Coetzee has been outstanding really in everything he's played, and various players have said he's kind of become the fulcrum of the team in many ways. They, at the outset of this European campaign, look to be in a very tough group. That is a hell of a start for them. You'd now give them a really good chance of getting out of this pool. Yeah,
I mean, to go to Bath in the opening weekend and win was basically unlocked it for them. Yeah. And then, you know, Claremont didn't travel, like they're weird. Like they came over, they helped someone with his car a couple of hours beforehand. Like there's this video going around in the rain in Belfast, the Claremont team pushing the car off the road in this kind of act of goodwill. So that was their big performance of the day. They won a few hearts and minds and they got a bonus point, you know. It's disappointing when a team of that calibre comes over and plays the way they did. They didn't fancy it. It was a wet, ugly night in Ravenhill, and they've probably worked it out that they don't necessarily need. They could probably get the points they need on the road in England over the course. It's risky business, but we've seen French teams do it before. Yeah. Bath and Harlequins are not particularly good teams. It's a pretty good draw for Ulster. Now that they've done it, if they can edge Harlequins over the back-to-backs, they've got Matt Fades, the former Highlanders fullback who signed for them, so they have cover for Addison. They've a bit more depth than they had before. They lost Sam Carter, they lost Jack McGrath, but they have that little bit of cover that they might not have had. They maybe can't afford to lose too many more in the tight five, but I think they're both reasonably short-term injuries, so I think they can manage their way through Addison's a blow, but I don't think he's played particularly well since he's come back from that long-term injury. He was actually up for interview yesterday.
Yeah. The missed tackle aside, generally he was very good and bad.
He was decent, yeah. I think he can be a lot better.
Yeah.
And he was just saying that he needs a bit of rhythm. And 2 minutes later, he walked out of the press conference room, and in 5 minutes the siding arrived. So he's not going to get that rhythm. I mean, I think he's a guy who needs an unbroken run. It probably does his Six Nations chances a bit of that damage as well.
Munster then, seeing as we touched on Murray, Keith, so that's the Murray conversation. One player, we had Ron Nagar on last night, we're trying to get through as much as we could. One player I didn't get to touch on with him was the man of the match, Mike Haley. Now, last year, I mean, the first time I saw Haley in person, he's a bigger man, I think, than he looks on TV, and has more presence than maybe sometimes comes across in the TV games. I'd say if you asked most Munster fans last year, they would have said, pretty solid, but unspectacular, and he seems to be flourishing a bit at the moment.
I think most guys are big compared to you, Joe. I think we'll pick that one up. But he isn't the finished article. He isn't a traditional Munster 15 either. My God, is he elusive. He's got fantastic balance. And look, if he steps into trouble, he gets blasted back because he isn't actually that big. But he is quick, but he has a lovely... It's a gliding run, it's a bit of a throwback actually to more extravagant fullbacks, but he's able to take off on an arc and have a go. He's a fine footballer. I think he played well in the air. I think he threw he got isolated near the end of the game, which and gave away a penalty, which was a messy penalty to give. So. But I would say still for a lot of these guys, these are huge pressurised games, and he wouldn't have played a huge number of them. And with 10 or 15 minutes to go in a big match, it's how do you take that pressure when you're under that level of fatigue? And these are learned skills and learned traits that you actually have. And in as much as Addison needs to go and play, I think actually Addison will do well even having an extra few weeks off. And it's terrible for him because he'd want to be playing, but he's been blighted with injury. And if he can get an extra body of work in, he can come back stronger. But for Haley, the more he's played this year, the better he's got. It's that focus. In the last 10, 15 minutes, I think becomes very important for him. Okay. But how is he going to learn from it unless he continues doing it? And I think he is doing it. I think he's doing very well.
I actually asked Addison about him yesterday because they played together at Sale.
I'm standing by the big comment, by the way, Keith. You can, and that's my
story.
I think
he's tall, but he was quite skinny when he first came over. I think that would be the view.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, he's tall, but I think he was considered.
You didn't say high, you said big.
Fine, I'm saying he's tall.
Yeah, they're different things.
Stay out of it for a minute.
I saw Addison used to live with him, so they both came from Sale, and they both came through that system. They used to live together, and they both signed for different Irish provinces at the same time, having had conversations with Joe Schmidt, who told them that there was opportunities there for them. And Addison kind of revealed a little bit of the conversations they were having on a weekly basis about how they were getting on, and Haley was telling them that he was struggling to get into the Munster system, that he found it quite tough, that they played a very, like Sale would have been a very counter-attacking team. And I have a feeling that the Larkham thing has probably opened things up for Mike Haley. There's a bit of belief in him there. Also the fact that he spent the first month and a half, 2 months of the season in Ireland camp playing with all those internationals, won a cap and was dropped a couple of days later. And I'd say he probably got a fair bit out of the experience of being in there, but he also got a bit of motivation to prove Joe Schmidt wrong. That he was, I think he was fairly close. I think he knew he was close to the cut line the whole time he was there. Yeah. So he was a million miles away from the World Cup, but I think he's shown form that could bring him in, because obviously Rob Kearney's in his last year of his contract. We don't know what he's going to do next. He's clearly one that Andy Farrell may move on from in the next while, so that 15 shirt is opening up. So he's definitely a contender, along with Addison. So I think Larkham's going to do a lot of those Munster backs the world of good. Yeah, and look, it's just nice to be capped as well, and you feel a bit more part of things, I'm sure, in your second year. On the performance generally, everyone's familiar with the flow of the game now and how it turned out, and Hanrahan's great 79, 80 minutes, and then the mistake at the end. Just in general terms, because we've talked about Munster's chances, I wasn't sure if this game furthered their credentials or took away from them in some respects. Well, it means they have to get something out of Saracens away.
But just in their general performance, did you look at it and go, like, there were a few nice extra wrinkles and attacks?
I think they're going to be really good next year.
Next year?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they can still get to a quarter-final and semi-final. and they may even get to a final. Like I do think they're one of the top 5-6 teams in the tournament. I'm not sure without the personnel they're bringing in next season they can quite get over one of the big teams on one of the biggest days. I think winning the Pro 14 will be a great result for Munster this season, and getting par in Europe, getting back to that semi-final. I think the coaching changes have been good, but they haven't been able to sign anyone apart from McCarthy, and they're losing Matthewson, which is a blow.
Yeah.
We don't know how the World Cup players will pitch up as the season goes on. You know, they had a lot of heavy involvement with Ireland in the World Cup, a lot of disappointment. So, you know, Murray, Peter O'Mahony, CJ Stander, like Stander's been going for a long time. But even the fact that they're throwing more offloads is going to make life a little easier for them. And there's nothing to say they can't go to France and reverse that. I thought Racing looked like real contenders. And as the pitches harden and they get back on their home soil and their home AstroTurf, they're a joy to watch, but they're also a very dangerous team, and they've still got some class to welcome back into that squad. And for all that they started slowly in France, it looks like they've really got something about them in Europe. So I think Munster will do well if they get the right draw. If they can be up on Saracens after those 2 games and can still top the pool, then they're definitely contenders. But I do think if they can get themselves a good draw through the Pro 14 this year and then bring in Dielende and Snyman, they're real contenders next year.
I have kind of a swear jar, Keith, where I'm going to have to like limit the number of times I was saying to the lads earlier where I talk about the fingerprints of Larkham on a given performance. But I'll chance it once more today. I think we saw a bit of that, didn't we?
I think there is a change, and to be honest, when I look at Van Gran and his level of openness to the coaching talent, I think that's been one of the big parts as well. I think Larkham gets a lot of the plaudits for it, but he's got a boss, and his boss is saying, "That's great. You're able to do that. We want to bring that into it. We want to expand the game out. That's actually what we want." And look, I know that Roundtree has only been there for a couple of weeks. If you're to meet him, he's like an excited puppy. He thinks this is just the coolest thing of all time. You know, he's so happy to be in there, and he's a very old school sort of guy, but has that energy from it. I mean, I always said from years ago, there's a couple of teams that are very similar. Leicester and Munster are quite similar. You know, they're not capital city teams. They have an awful lot of their own grown through. Leicester are struggling in the last number of years. Munster haven't quite got to the heights that they would like to have done it. They've taken in guys from overseas as coaches, as players, and it's trying to go back to what it was that meant to be a Leicester man or a Munster man. And you're looking for overseas to do it. But in Roundtree, they actually have a guy who he grew up on the idea of Munster and Leicester and that type of thing. So he's great. Larkham is entirely different. Very capable, different mindset, wants to do different things, but wants to win. So you won't see Munster being flash, flinging the ball out unless they're able to do it properly. And that's one of the things. So it is process, but it's also about pushing the skill level of players that get onto the field. Like, if you look at that game at the weekend, I would agree. I think Racing look stunning, you know, as a side. They have an incredible group of players, huge strength and depth, game breakers all over the field. And Munster looked really good, looked down for periods of the game, but then fought all the way back at the end. I feel an awful lot for JJ, and he did everything right in the game. So, but again, I'll go back to the last few minutes. When has he had to go and put a drop goal over to win a big European Cup game? And I'd equally say, and Rogers on the radio over the last couple of days, how many times did he miss? He did miss before he got it. You have to learn these skills. They're not instinctive.
It's funny, we had him on yesterday and he was saying the kick should have happened a few phases earlier, and that's just experience, you know.
It's great to see JJ Hanrahan running the show for Munster in a big game like that, and leading, and playing 80 minutes and leading the way he did, and fulfilling that potential that has so long been there. And it's probably, you know, it's a long time since that, you know, it had to stop being potential at some stage. And I think he's making life a little bit more difficult for Joey Carberry to come straight back into the team. I certainly think he's an alternative. he's a player who's playing with a lot of confidence. He clearly likes what the coaches have finally invested in him, I think.
What age is he now, Rory?
He'd be 27, 28,
Okay.
off the top of my head, yeah. So maybe 26, but I think, he's mid-career and he's had a lot of hurt along the way. He had that move to Northampton. He's matured. I mean, out-halves take a lot of time. They have to have a lot of lived experience before they can kind of fulfil it, and it's great to see. Very, very quickly, because I really have to move on to Connacht and Leinster. But Keith, are we still looking at Finn Russell and saying, when the going gets tough and things get very squeaky bum time, we don't quite trust Finn Russell? Because every time I watch him play, I don't know, am I just catching him on his good days? But I look at him and think he's brilliant.
Look, sure, he is. Well, he's mercurial. Let's see.
A more reliable mercurial these days, is he?
He is, when he's playing for Racing, who give him the freedom to be able to go and do it and have the rest of the players around him to cover up when it doesn't work. When people said that he deliberately nutmegged someone, I think that's a nutmeg in a photograph. I'm not so certain. I think that was it.
But they say he called Megs as he kicked the ball.
Yeah, unlikely, I'd say. And that was the one part of the performance from Munster I didn't like. Was that we were given the insight into how to play against Finn Russell in the World Cup, which was just to run straight into his face, have a defensive 10, 12, 13 hook so that he can't see what's going on.
Yeah.
I thought he played very smartly. I thought he was given the space to do it.
To move on to Leinster very briefly, we talked a lot about that performance, and Leo Cullen said, look, it's just one of those grinded out kind of non-vintage days, but again, the kind of performances Leinster can put in over the last 10 years and marry to the flowing rugby as well. One point to throw to you, Keith, because this was kind of interesting. This came up on Sunday with Michael Swift. We had him in studio as well. So Luke Fitzgerald tweeted this during the match, so I presume it was about the Leinster match. James Ryan seems to be maybe the people are speculating it was about, but it doesn't actually matter. It's more of a general point. He said, note for most forwards, that's why I'm putting it to you. If you're in big open space and you have outside backs with you, do not wait to draw the man. Give it straight away and then assume the support run a roll. It's very annoying watching outside backs having to hold their run while defence gets a chance to get back and scramble. And that made perfect sense to me. It was interesting, Michael Swift was saying on Sunday that draw your man first maxim is embedded in his head, and actually forwards are guilty of forcing outside backs to jog alongside them screaming for the ball.
I'm not entirely sure what you asked. Actually, what Luke said is correct. And if it's in loose space, look, and I'm a guy who didn't want to pass the ball ever, right? But in loose space, and you have a winger outside it, give it to the winger.
Yeah. What I asked was Michael Swift was saying sometimes it can be drilled into you growing up. Draw the man first. That's the best thing to do. Yeah. No,
you draw the man when they say it's 3-on-2, but not when it's 3-on-2 with 20 yards between you. You don't take up the space.
And did you ever get the ball and think, sod it, I've got the pace, I'm going? You did have the space, to be fair, at times.
I did. There was space, and I did have a bit of pace. And there's times I did it well, and there are times I did it very badly. I had Paddy Reid, who won the Grand Slam with Ireland in 1948, once said to me after a Gary Owen game, he said, is Davy Costello speaking to you? And I said, why? Because I wouldn't if I was him, because you didn't pass him the ball when you should have.
Right.
So, yes, I can remember that now often. It's only 20 years ago when he gave me that bollocking.
Leinster in a line or two, they were...
Yeah, I mean, it was funny over there. It seemed like, classic.
Were you at it?
Yeah, I was at it. Watching on, it was like gritty, grounded out, a lot of character. They didn't have the ball. A lot of penalties went against them. And then you go down to interview them afterwards, and they were really, really annoyed with themselves. Not happy with that was one of 3 missed opportunities that they had. 2 lineouts that Kelleher overthrew. A bit of a lesson for him, although he played very, very, very well in the loose. So they were pretty disappointed with themselves. And I think if you go back to the Saracens game, and that Gary Ringrose pass is the one that springs to mind, but it was one of a couple of opportunities they had to kind of take control of that Saracens game. Mm-hmm. They're a bit annoyed with themselves that they haven't learned from that. There was one time Robbie Henshaw had 4 men outside him, including James Lowe steaming onto his shoulder, and he ignored him, took it into contact, and the chance was gone. The Ryan one was a clear one where he should have gone to a back and realigned because there was 3 quicker men outside him. And he was unlucky in that there was a good piece of defending that stopped the ball out of his hand, but even still, that was a nailed-on try. And then James Lowe, they played a lovely bit of movement down the left, and Lowe tried a fancy offload that went against them.
Yeah.
So that was, we got, Sexton and Cullen afterwards. They were both pretty annoyed about that. So they feel like they could be a lot better, but
they're almost
winning
playing against
games.
their own standards, aren't they? Really, when you talk about it in those terms.
Leon put them in a difficult play. I think Leon, we're going to be talking about Leon for a while, even though they're still a bit turgid now. The stadium's pretty impressive. There's a lot of money behind them.
Yeah.
They're building something there. I think in the next couple of years we're going to see them as a bit of a force.
Okay. And then Connacht finally, Keith, very quickly. So over in Toulouse, obviously, which isn't easy. Toulouse scored 2 tries in the last 20 minutes. The fourth was right in the whistle to claim the bonus point. So maybe the scoreline wasn't as representative of the game, 32 points to 17. Andy Friend said as much and then said, really, for us, this comes down to the back-to-back games against Gloucester, which of course it does.
Yeah, I think so. And I only saw the highlights of that game. But I do know as well in the manner in which some of the French teams play when they're at home, that's actually when they expect to pull away. It's not any surprise for them that they'll score in the last while. They'd like to have been up more at the very start. I think Connacht are doing incredibly well with the injuries that they've had, with the squad that they have on the field against aristocrats of European rugby, of Heineken Cup rugby. For me, they're the leading light in France in trying to get back to France's style again. I think they'll be upset by it, but again, it comes down to games they know they can play against and win. So they have a really good opportunity. They started, if you looked at the first 2 games and you said they'd have the points that they have, I think they'd be pretty happy with it. They have a tough draw.
Yeah, without patronising them, I think they're looking back at a game against Montpellier where they're disappointed they didn't get a winning bonus point, and they're looking back on a game against Toulouse where they're probably disappointed they didn't win it, but certainly that they didn't get a losing bonus point in that game, and they would have been in a really, really strong position at that point. I never expected them to get out of the pool. I think they're doing better than I ever expected them. I think maybe I need to stop underestimating Connacht a bit more. Again, I think Gloucester's a really tough back-to-back. I think Gloucester are a good team, but they're starting to show that that they've nothing to fear against anyone right now.
Okay. Just before we go, by the way, Keith, I know you're not going to be in Galway with us on the 11th of December. We're doing a roadshow there. Brian O'Driscoll will be there. Andy Friend will be along. Tiernan O'Halloran as well. And we've just confirmed a new guest today, Keith. So you can identify him through the prism of Rishtard Cooper doing an impersonation of this man. He's going to be at our roadshow. Have a listen.
Back row breakdown, vital, impact, contact, halfbacks, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, vital. Bring it on. Space, vision, mano tuolongi, absolutely vital. More vital than anyone or anything, anywhere, ever.
3 guesses.
Will Greenwood.
Done, yes. You didn't find that funny, no? Yeah.
Yeah, he sounds like it. And do you know what? I'll be honest. I actually said, Jesus, has Will got a bit of a nose? He's got a bit of a cold, because I forgot that you said it was Rishtard Cooper.
Yeah.
It's bloody awesome, actually. And Will talk you to death. He has more energy than you could shake a stick at. It'll be cracking.
We're looking forward to it. And we have another guest that we can't just announce yet, but will also be very timely and interesting. So you can get your tickets in the usual places, offtheball.com/events. That's us done. Have you anything? You look like you're poised to add something, no? Okay. Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent, thank you. Keith, thanks as ever. Appreciate it.
Cheerio, gents.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.